All right, good deal. Well, thanks for having me. How did I end up here? I met Dave 5 years ago, just before COVID hit in February of 2020. I was giving a talk down at Seacoast Audubon, and here we are 5 years later, finally, after the world went sideways. Good thing we're still young, is what I say. So I want to talk about a project that I actually spoke about at the Seacoast chapter that I've been involved with for a long time. And it's a collaboration between the local chapter where I live in Billings, Montana, Yellowstone Valley Audubon Society, and industry. And so it was a project that they started actually before I got involved. And I know that you all are also have a few other projects going. Bill was telling me about your Purple Martin project, and I've heard people talking about kestrel boxes. And so this is a project that Yellowstone Valley Audubon Society started on ospreys. And so we'll give a little history about that as we move along here. And I think a good place to start when you think about ospreys is what osprey populations were like quite a few decades ago. These are breeding bird survey data. You're probably all familiar with those. These are breeding BBS data for Canada and the US, and it basically shows the population trend of ospreys. The breeding bird survey started in the late 60s, and that's why the timeline only goes back to the late 60s, because that's when it started. And you see that osprey populations were really low. They've been climbing steadily since then. And there are really four big reasons why. Number one is we got rid of DDT. DDT had a huge effect on ospreys, just like it did bald eagles, brown pelicans, peregrine falcons, Cooper's hawks. A whole slew of sort of upper trophic level species were impacted by DDT. And once we got rid of DDT, we figured out it was bad for the environment. Those species that had been suppressed because of DDT started to increase. Ospreys also started to increase because we put more power poles on the landscape. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Bill alluded to it. Ospreys like to try to nest on power poles. And since we've got more of them out there now, there's more opportunity for them to try to do that. In the arid West where I live, sort of eastern Montana, eastern Colorado, eastern Wyoming, over time, we've put in more reservoirs or more hobby ponds, if you will. People in their backyards that like having ponds, they like throwing fish in there. And so that has also benefited ospreys. The fourth reason is they're really tolerant of people, some pairs. This is a nest on my study area. I've got a friend here that's smiling because I took him to this nest. This is a nest that's on a light pole at the Billings Motorcycle Club. And that small dirt track. So the nest is right here. This small dirt track, it's just one of the areas where they race motorcycles. But on this dirt track, they race motorcycles at night. All right. And the ospreys are perfectly happy to nest on this light pole, have the light shining, and motorcycles, dirt bikes racing around at night. And as it turns out, this is one of the most productive nests that we have on the study area. So this is another characteristic of ospreys. Some pairs are just perfectly willing to deal with us. And if you notice here, the bleachers are actually where humans sit, is actually farther away from the track than where the ospreys are. Well, with more ospreys comes more conflict. All right, like I said, this is a species that is perfectly willing to try to nest on power poles. So on the right is a really bad situation here. Here are ospreys attempting to build a nest on what we refer to as an energized pole. It's got power to it. It's hot, if you will. And that's a bad situation. And so Wildlife Services, which is a federal government agency, deals with wildlife conflicts, usually mostly regarding agriculture. But they've been involved with ospreys since those osprey populations have been increasing over the decades. And that graph just shows you these are our Wildlife Services data from the USDA of how many times they've had to basically enact some sort of management action because of ospreys. And you see that the number of interactions that Wildlife Services had with ospreys basically sort of mimics the osprey population trend. More ospreys, more potential conflicts. So as a result of that, Yellowstone Valley Audubon, YVAS, was just like you guys. They were interested in starting a project sort of beyond just going out, and I'm not poo-pooing field trips, but doing a little bit more than just going out maybe every other week or once a month doing field trips. They decided they wanted to sort of do something, I don't want to say more meaningful, but maybe a little bit more engaging, and that might have more application than just going out and looking at birds. And so they picked ospreys. They were like, well, why don't we study ospreys? And there are a lot of them. They're fairly tolerant of people. They seem to be getting into conflict. Maybe we as a chapter, if we get enough volunteers together, can sort of help management agencies sort of reduce the potential conflicts that have come across because of increasing osprey populations. And number one are osprey power line interactions. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about entanglements. I'll sort of leave that as it is right now. And then they were interested in basically just learning about osprey. So they started this project in 2009. I didn't get involved with it until 2012. I ended up being invited to give a talk. I actually gave about saw-whet owls to their chapter. And at the time, they knew that I was a rapid researcher and had been in Montana on and off for a long time. And they sort of asked me, well, would you be interested in being involved with this Osprey project? It's like, yeah, absolutely. And now at the time, I was still an academic. So I was able to go back to Montana where I was teaching in Minnesota during the summertime and take part on this project. So there are, this is hard to believe, and it's a number that probably doesn't make much sense, but I'm going to put it in perspective. There are about 90,000 miles of power lines in Montana. All right. And as an academic or as a teacher, you always try to come up with anecdotes. Well, what's 90,000 miles? I mean, seems like a lot. 90,000 miles is almost 4 times around the planet. All right. The equator is like 25,000 miles. All right. So there's almost 4 times as many miles in Montana, 4 times around the planet. So that's plenty of opportunity for ospreys to get into trouble. All right. And I've just given you a couple more examples here of, trying to nest on a power pole, throwing sticks on energized poles, showing up on a power pole with a large wet fish that oftentimes is still alive and flopping around, and the bird itself is wet. And so that sort of is a potential electrocution hazard. And so it made obviously real sense then for Yellowstone Valley Audubon to partner with power companies. And on our study area, which I'm going to show you here in a little bit, there are 5 different power companies that have responsibility for the power lines there. So in Montana, we have a couple, if you will, investor-owned power companies. One, Northwestern Energy, that I work for. Montana and Dakota Utilities is also investor-owned. But then we have a slew of cooperatives, which are member-owned. All right, as the name implies, they're cooperatives. And in Montana, we have 26 different cooperatives. And 3 of those occur on our study area. And then we also have a tree trimmer that also gets involved in our project on and off. So you might think, and Bill sort of alluded to this, or at least he was sort of complimentary, that it's kind of a strange relationship between an Audubon chapter and industry. You might think this is a little weird. Why, what are some of the commonalities, or how can we sort of figure out or have a common goal when we're dealing with ospreys? And I put it in sort of this perspective to get you to think about it. Both entities want to protect birds, but their motivations are a little bit different. There's a whole segment of wildlife science or wildlife conservation or any kind of conservation called human dimensions. And basically it's an attempt to try to figure out what values and attitudes do people have, and how do those sort of get projected into motivations for conservation. And so there's overlap in bird protection between the power companies and Yellowstone Valley Audubon, but it's for different reasons. All right. But it almost doesn't matter that it's for different reasons. All right. Yellowstone Valley Audubon are people like you. They like the birds. They like natural values or artistic values. They enjoy birds. All right. The power company, of course, has people that enjoy birds, but their primary motivation when it comes to ospreys and bird protection are federal regulations. All right. Killing birds is against the law. All right. They're protected. And when sometimes birds get electrocuted or they interact with power lines, they reduce what's referred to as system reliability. The lights go out, there might be an electrocution, and because of that, there's a power outage. All right. And so the power company is interested, of course, in maintaining reliable service. And so their motivations are slightly different than the Yellowstone Valley Audubon's, but they overlap in that they're both interested in bird protection. So this is pretty neat, I think, from a conservation perspective. So what do? We've got literally about 40 people, 40 volunteers every year that go out and look for nests, all right, and monitor the nests. And we've developed a field operations manual that I edit every year. And basically it's an effort, because we're interested in doing science as well as sort of some basic conservation, and standardizing our efforts. We want to make sure that those 40 volunteers, people exactly like you, are going out and collecting the data the same way, the way I want it to be collected, all right? So standardizing monitoring efforts. The field manual also has a bunch of distance guidelines in it. We want to make sure that even though some ospreys are really tolerant of people, that our activities don't, cause them to abandon a nest or have one of their eggs cook in the sun or one, a fledgling fly out of the nest beforehand. So a lot of that field operations manual is devoted to distance guidelines. I don't want you going any closer during this period of the breeding cycle to get the observations that we would like. All right. Then I sort of introduced some basic, ornithological terminology. And during the season, mostly during the summer season, we communicate via Google Group. So we have a Google Group set up. I am not getting today. I'm looking at my phone right now. Today, I probably had 10 messages on the Google Group about what people had seen regarding ospreys, because ospreys just got back to Montana about the same time as they do here. So what kind of information do we have the monitors collect? Well, number one, if you just look at the box text on the list there, our birds, in quotes now, our ospreys, most of them show up in April, the first 2 weeks of April. We've got a few that come in really early, the end of March, but most of them show up in April. And then during that time period, so the different stages of the reproductive cycle, they'll go through courtship, right? If the members of the pair know each other from previous years, well, they'll get to know each other again a little bit more because they don't spend the winter together. And they will recognize each other. So there's a courtship phase. They start working on their nest, refurbishing their nest. Then there's egg laying. There's an incubation period that's about 40 days long. The nestling stage is about 8 weeks long or so. And then finally the birds fledge, all right? So these osprey nest monitors are very busy in the field from April to August, all right? We have them, people do this way more than they have to. I sort of set a guideline. I'll try to go out, at least once a week or once every 10 days and try to answer the questions on the right. But some of them, as you can imagine, are just like you folks, highly motivated. They're almost out there every day. All right. So some of the things we want to know is, well, is the nest occupied? In other words, did two adults show up to the nest at the beginning of the breeding season? Maybe that nest isn't used. So that's one thing we want to know. Is the nest occupied? Were eggs laid? When did they hatch? And we've trained people now. You can tell the difference when the eggs have laid and when they've hatched by the female's behavior on the nest. Is she really low, kind of an incubation posture, and once the eggs hatch, is she up a little bit and kind of looking down at her feet? So it sounds sort of hard to figure out, but people that get trained up are really easy. It's really easy to figure out when eggs start hatching. What was the brood size? In other words, how many young were there? How many ended up fledging? And then because we do I band nestlings, were any of the adults banded? So if you look at this photograph right here, you can see this adult right here has a band on it, and I'll describe that a little bit more. And then most importantly, as YBAS nest monitors contributing to power companies, did you see any conflicts? When you were driving around, did you see any sticks ending up on new power poles for new pairs that we didn't know about? All right. And so here on the upper right is a brand new pair. They've just getting to know each other. This was a few years ago, and they started messing around on an energized power pole. Well, when we see that, we can alert the power companies and say, hey, there's some birds that are potentially going to cause a problem on this power pole. And I'll show you a little bit later how we mitigate for that. So those 40 or so on average nest monitors, we covered that portion of the Yellowstone River. So you're probably not very familiar with Montana. The Yellowstone National Park is right here in the corner of Wyoming. And the Yellowstone River starts in Yellowstone National Park, and it basically flows. All those green dots are nesting territories. All right. And the ospreys sort of end as you're going east at a town called Miles City. All right. They just haven't colonized beyond Miles City. But that gives you an idea. That's about 400 miles or so. And in total, over the years, we're bumping up close to 100 occupied territories. But I'll show you some data here in a second. So that gives you an idea of what the scale is, right? We have 40 people out there. Some of them are assigned just one nest. Some of them are assigned 3 or 4 nests, however many they think they can handle. And so they're spread out across that landscape, collecting the data that we want to collect. So how do these conflicts come about in the first place? On the left is a photograph I took of what is sort of a traditional in your mind osprey nest, right? Ospreys like to nest on dead trees, often with the tops broken off. And this has to do with the way they approach their nest when they're building it. So those trees are called snags. So they like trees that are dead with just a few branches, and they start building the nest on top of that. It doesn't take a whole lot of imagination, because I don't have that much, to look at a power pole and go, kind of looks like a snag, doesn't it? Looks like a dead tree with just a few branches on it. So that's probably why ospreys are keying in on this. Well, this is a bad thing, right? So one of the things we do at power companies, if we notice that ospreys are starting to throw sticks on an energized pole, we can prevent that with a simple sort of PVC conduit tube that we put on top of the cross arms. And so when the sticks get dropped, they sort of bounce off to the ground. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well. If those ospreys in an area are really persistent, they really want that energized pole, or they really want to set up their nesting territory in that spot, we'll put up what's referred to as a nest platform, right? It's a power pole. It doesn't have any wires on it. It's got a cross arm on it, but then it's just got a real spool on the top of it where the ospreys can build their nest. All right, so that's an artificial nest platform. So here's what I was talking about. So here's this conduit, PVC conduit. All right, the sticks can't gather underneath it usually very well. It's okay if the ospreys kind of play around on it. They don't like perching on it because they can't actually grab it because it's hard plastic. But them playing around on top of it is fine. Other power companies will do something else. They might use some plastic pipe that looks like this and put it in a bow. Um, you might driving around here. I haven't noticed. I haven't been here long enough, but I did see a platform just by Kittery when I was driving up on the interstate. Sometimes you might see triangles. We've gotten, my power company and other power companies have gotten away from using triangles. We call it kind of Osprey Velcro because those triangles actually hold the sticks. All right, so sticks, it's great for accumulating sticks. And so I took this photograph on purpose because it just shows you, well, triangles don't work really well. All right, and then everyone knows about these plastic owls. They work even less. All right, so that's just an example of how it doesn't work. But I want to show you why this PVC on top of the pole works. That's an osprey building its nest. Red-tailed hawks, golden eagles, when they approach their nest, they usually approach it from below and then fly up to it. Ospreys kind of sort of hover down to it. And that's why having this PVC tube on top helps to help shed sticks. It wouldn't work for something like a red-tailed hawk or a raven. In fact, ravens like building their nests underneath that PVC pipe, but that's another story. Oops. So depending on the year now, this is nuts. Depending on the year now, close to 95% of our ospreys are on artificial nest platforms. All right. They started trying to build on poles that were energized, and we and other power companies had to get them off of those energized poles. So we put them up a platform, and now they're on platforms. So just think about this now. We have a wild bird, a large raptor, that about 95% of it is on completely artificial structure. All right. It's almost animal husbandry. That's what I tell people. It's like we're getting to the point now where we're farming ospreys. All right. Kind of cool, but from my perspective as a wildlife biologist, a little bit strange. We've got a few on other things. They don't mind nesting on cell towers. You go down to Florida, and bald eagles and ospreys are all on cell towers. Not all of them, but a lot of them are on cell towers. There's a problem. They don't get electrocuted up there, but it reduces the opportunity for maintenance and things like that because you can't disturb the birds when they're nesting. Very few in trees, light poles, as I mentioned, and we've got a few on old railroad trestles. But going out there, they are on nest platforms. So here's the thing, right? We've got bad situation on the left, ospreys piling sticks onto an energized pole that, if that got wet, that could burst into flame. The birds could get electrocuted, power outages, equipment damage, fire, you name it. It's just a bad situation. Well, we do the good thing, right? We put up a PVC conduit, prevent them from accumulating sticks on an energized pole, put up a nest platform near that. And I've using this photograph on purpose, because then at this time of year, sort of anxious, in March or so for the ospreys to come back. There's still a little snow on the platforms. Well, that's where kind of can go south. All right. Geese, we are having more and more problems with Canada geese taking over osprey nest platforms. Canada geese start nesting before ospreys do in Montana and probably everywhere else. And so geese have first crack now at some of the platforms. So what happens? The goose takes over an osprey nest platform. And if you ever were chased by a barnyard goose when you were a kid, you realize they're stubborn, they're aggressive. So ospreys, when they come back, if geese are on that platform and have laid eggs, Ospreys will not be able to get those geese off of that platform. So what do? They start hunting around for another pole that typically has wires on it. So this is a bad thing. And about now on the Yellowstone River, about 10% of the platforms that we have put up in the past have geese, or that have geese have sort of eyeballed them and used them in the past. And you might think, well, it's kind of crazy for a goose to nest on a platform. You might think a goose doesn't have that kind of dexterity or flight coordination to do it. And so I took these two photographs. I almost drove off the road because I drove by and I saw this up here, and I thought one of the cooperatives was messing with me. I thought they had put a decoy on top of a pole. So when I went, because I knew I drove by this road a lot, and when I went by it, I was looking at it and I almost drove off the road, didn't, stopped, got in position with my scope, put my scope on it, and I had to look at that thing for a couple of minutes before I could tell the eye was blinking. All right. And I was like, well, unbelievable. That is a goose that landed gracefully. I didn't see it, but I assume somewhat gracefully on top of that pole. All right. This is what a goose nest looks like. Geese don't make their own nest. All right. They might sort of scrape around a little bit in vegetation that's on the ground or obviously on a platform, and then they'll lay their eggs and pull some feathers and kind of line the nest with feathers. They don't bring in sticks and mud and things like that, like a robin or an osprey, and build a nest. All right. Um, and so what we can do then is just tear off the nest at the end of the season, and then geese can't use it. A goose does not want to lay its eggs on a bare platform like that. So, like I said, about 10% of the nests in the Yellowstone River, geese have either tried to use in the past or sort of eyeballed them. And so I'll go, and I know which platforms those are, obviously. And so I'll go around at the end of the season, either late fall or late winter, and I'll just clean them off. And then the geese can't use them. More animal husbandry, if you will, right? It's getting a little nuts. So this is what our population is doing. This is complicated, or looks complicated, but I'll explain it real quickly here. All we have is year on the x-axis, all right? So every year there's some information on this graph, all right? Two pieces of information. On the left side is the number of occupied nests, and you would read it from these numbers right here. And you look at the legend, and here the occupied nest is in red. So this is the number of occupied nests over this time period. And you see that when we first started, we only had about 50 occupied nests when we first started the project in real detail, in a real sort of concerted effort way. And the population's almost doubled in a little bit more than 10 years, all right, on the Yellowstone River. Then these blue bars are how many young were fledged on average per the occupied nest. And that is red on this side of the axis, on the other secondary y-axis here. And so you see, yeah, and so you would read, so in 2024, a little bit more than one young on average was fledged from an occupied nest, right? And you see that the number of young fledged kind of goes up and down a little bit over time. That's not unusual. What's of interest here, though, is this line. That's sort of the break-even point that other researchers have modeled. So if ospreys produce more young higher above that yellow line, that means it's more than stable. It's potentially increasing. So you see every year, we've gotten close one year, but every year the Yellowstone River ospreys are producing way more young than they need to maintain a stable population based on mortality and things like that. That explains, in one sense, why we're probably seeing real population increase over time. It's because productivity is really good over time. We ban birds, or I ban birds. The project bans birds, or ospreys. When I say birds, I'm talking about ospreys now. And each osprey gets two different bands. It gets the silver band. I'm not sure how familiar you are with banding, but it gets what's the USGS, sort of the standard government band, all right? And that band is free. You get it from the government. You have to be a bird bander and license and all this. But that band has inscribed number on it of 9 digits. It's analogous to a Social Security number, the number on that band. No other osprey in North America is going to have whatever number it is, 9-digit numbers on that silver band. But looking at that silver band, you can't see all 9 numbers, right? Unless the band rotates. So it's kind of hard to read unless the bird is in the hand again. So what we do, people that work on ospreys and other birds, we put on color bands because those can be visible from a distance with either a spotting scope or a good camera. And just like this number right here is individual or unique to the bird, like the Social Security number, no other osprey on my project is going to have the code 27/C on it. all right, then its sibling would have 28 over C. And so I've been working my way through the alphabet from 00, over A, just kind of cranking along through the alphabet. And so you can see these codes from a distance and get information then from the birds without actually having to handle them again. Power companies provide the in-kind support for that, right? I mean, they have the bucket trucks. I work for a power company now. We have the bucket trucks to go up. And so I band birds with power company linemen. And they get education about the birds. All right. They learn about the birds. They like the birds. They don't want them to get electrocuted. And here are just two of the magazines that have come out. Rural Montana is the magazine for the electric cooperatives in Montana, those 26 cooperatives. That's their monthly magazine that comes out. We had an article, we made the cover. And then Northwestern Energy, we made the cover one time with a happy lineman holding an osprey nestling. So what have we learned from these banded birds, all right? These banded birds, when I put the band on, I know exactly where and in what year and date, et cetera, I put the band on. So I know how old that bird is if it shows up later on, right? And one of the things we're interested in is, well, how old, when do these birds start breeding? At what age are they sort of reproductively mature? If you look at the literature, it's typically 3 years old is when ospreys start breeding. All right, they're old enough, they're sexually mature, they can start breeding. Whereas something like a robin can breed, the following year. It takes ospreys a couple of years. So this bar graph right here just shows you when males and females first started breeding, and I know who they are, right? I know, I can't read the code right here. This is 89 over something. I know how old that bird was, and when that bird then subsequently showed up at a breeding territory. I'm like, aha, I banded you in whatever, 2016. I know how old you are. And so you'll see, we've had some birds start breeding as 2 years old. All right. That's another thing that sort of indicates that the Yellowstone River is highly productive habitat. We have birds that are breeding really young or fairly young. All right. And on average, though, if you take when these individuals start breeding, you see both males and females start on average, if you took them all together, at about 3.5 years of age. But between 3 and 4 years, that's when most of them start breeding. And that's what's been shown in the literature. This is kind of neat. It's a little bit hard, but I'm going to explain it. We'll use the buddy system here. One of the things I'm interested in is lifetime reproductive success. It's how many young an individual produces over its lifetime. And you have to know who the individual is, right? They have to be marked where you can recognize them. We're not just talking about any robin that's in your yard, right? You have to be able to say, this robin is different from this one. And I know when it first started breeding and how many young it had over its lifetime, and then it disappeared because it died. That's what these data show. So here's just the number of fledglings that were produced, all right, for individuals. And you see, I've got it broken out here by birds that have already died and birds that are still alive. Most of the birds that settled on the breeding on the study area didn't produce any young during their lifetime. And this is kind of actually a common pattern in birds. Most of them don't produce any young or very few young. And this is one of them over here. This guy over here is 60E. He's unfortunately one of the birds in this tall black column right here. He didn't raise any young because the first year that he started breeding, he was breeding next to the interstate and got hit by a car. All right. Game over. This guy right here, I just found out he didn't show up until just yesterday. This was a white bar. I thought he was still alive, but he hasn't come back. A different male with a different band shown up and is trying to woo his female. And so far, he's not had any luck. She's sort of, I think, still waiting for him to show up, but I'm not sure he's gonna. But anyway, this guy, if he's died or even if he's still alive, he's had 22 young his whole life so far. All right. And guess where he nests? In the Billings Motorcycle Club. No lie. He nests on that light pole in the Billings Motorcycle Club. So what's my management recommendation? We need more motorcycle clubs, right? So another thing we're interested in is where do the birds go? Like they're raised at a place, right? This is their natal nest. And then where do they end up as breeders? And this is a little complicated. It's kind of a mess, but I don't really care. I'm going to explain it. So the study area is the green ribbon here. That's the river, all right? And then these are kind of hard to see, but these are arrows. This is probably the easiest one to see. So this arrow, the tail of the arrow, is where that osprey was raised. and obviously I banded it, and it showed up as a breeder where the head of the tail, or where the head of the line is, where the arrow of the line is. All right. So he was raised here, and it's a male because I got the males in blue. So he was raised near Miles City, and then he settled to breed, some distance away. So all of this sort of mishmash of lines right here, I just want to give you a flavor here that these birds are moving around. Typically, the females move twice the distance from their natal nest to where they start breeding. That's a pattern we see very common in birds. It's actually opposite in mammals. But 62 kilometers is about 40 miles. So on average, females move about 40 miles from where they were raised, and males settle about 20 miles or so away from where they were raised. That's natal dispersal. And we're able to get that information because the birds, once again, are banded and they have individual codes on them. Some of the birds disperse way off the study area. All right. So other people are seeing our bird, again, in quotes, our birds. So some of our birds, one of them, a male nested down in Utah, for crying out loud. We've had a couple sort of loitering around this area here in northeastern Colorado and southeastern Wyoming. We've had a few move over into western Montana. Other researchers have seen, and these ones that are purple in color, I don't know what the sex are because someone wasn't able to get a photograph and they couldn't tell me whether it was a male or a female, so that's why those are purple. But these birds get around, all right? They move around from the Yellowstone rivers. Well, there have been electrocutions, all right? This is kind of, this is the bummer slide here. Despite, our efforts, like I said, there are so many power pools out there and there are so many ospreys out there. Some of them are going to get into trouble. And this, this is sort of the telltale signs of electrocution. If you look closely at the feathers here, you can see they're singed. Obviously, that bird was below a pole, so the implication is it got electrocuted. And then you walk up to it, and sure enough, you have diagnostic signs that it did get electrocuted. Unfortunately, it was one of the birds that that had been banded as a nestling. And this just shows you the number of electrocutions by month over the whole study period. So most of our electrocutions sort of happen early in the spring, if you will, and the number of electrocutions drop off, and then the number of electrocutions pick up again in August to September. And there's a real age component to this. So the adults that are getting electrocuted are almost always new birds, all right? They don't have a platform yet, all right, that they're going back to. They're sort of recruiting into the population. And so they're the ones that are most likely to be messing around on energized poles, and they end up getting electrocuted. We've also had a fair number, well, not a fair number, I can think of 3 or 4 that were electrocuted because geese took over their platform and they went to an energized pole before we could mitigate that potential disaster. All right, so they got electrocuted that way. Then the number of electrocutions really drops off in the middle of summer. All right, but then it picks up again when these fledglings are out, sort of uncoordinated, flying around near their nest. They're not very good at landing. They land on a cross arm, and whereas an adult, might stick it like a, an Olympic gymnast, nice and tight, one landing. A young osprey might have its wings out, sort of when it's landing, and touches 2 wires. And so I think that's why we have some electrocutions of young birds later on in the season. But there is some good news here, believe it or not. Here's our I showed you this before. Here's our population increase. All right. Here's the same x-axis. We started at about 50 and we're almost doubled. The number of electrocutions has gone up has gone up and down over the years, but it hasn't gone up in line with population increase. All right. So we've been able to maintain number of electrocutions at a fairly low level, despite the population overall almost doubling. And that is a testament to having people like you, 40 nest volunteers out there, alerting me and the power companies right away if they see sticks ending up on energized poles. We're able to get the bucket truck out there and deal with it before birds get electrocuted. So this is one of sort of, again, it's distressing having these birds get electrocuted, but we've maintained it between 1 in 4 birds a year, despite the overall population almost doubling, which is great. Here's something that's also distressing. I referred to entanglements earlier. So much of the West is cattle country, right? And so a lot of the agriculture is producing hay to feed cattle during the wintertime when everything is snow covered. And that hay can be baled kept together in a bale, either what's referred to as with baling twine, kind of this orange, well, most often it's orange, kind of a polypropylene rope, if you will, or tight, string, or a net wrap, which actually I always tell people it's kind of like cheesecloth, except it's artificial. It's made out of plastic, all right, but it's got kind of that characteristic. It's a net, if you will. So ospreys like picking this stuff up. They're not the only birds that pick it up, but ospreys have a propensity to pick this stuff up and put it in their nests. We don't know exactly why they put it in their nests. It's not color because they pick up all different kinds of color. But maybe it's padding or maybe it's a signal. Ospreys will pick up algae, and other soft materials to line their nest. I went up in a bucket truck one time, and when I got to the top and I was looking at the nest, it was like covered sort of in orange, and I thought, oh man, it's just completely covered in baling twine. And as it turned out, it was shredded cottonwood bark that had that kind of orange color. And I was like, whoa, this is bark, not twine. But it picked up a lot of twine. This nest right here, that's the twine that was in it, and it's over 2 football fields in length. I measured it. And it's like 675 feet in one nest. All right. That's not good. This stuff is polypropylene, it's plastic. It doesn't stretch. I always think of it when it starts to fray that it's kind of like dental floss, right? It's that strong, right? It's hard to break dental floss. So just look at this photograph here in the upper left. Here's an osprey, unfortunately, that is in bad shape. Look at the right leg right here. That's the normal right leg. See, it's kind of skinny. It's got good coloration. Compare that to the left leg right here. It's all swollen. It's necrotic. It's bloody. What has happened is when that bird was smaller, this is a fledgling. Well, it never fledged because it got stuck in the nest. When that bird was small, it got baling twine around its leg. The bird kept growing in size, but the baling twine doesn't stretch like dental floss. So the flesh gets the baling twine kind of cuts into the flesh the same way a tree growing around barbed wire does, right? That's bad. This bird had to be euthanized. There was just absolutely no way to recover this guy. This is just completely rotten right here. Here's one I was able to rescue during banding. You can see he's got some baling twine around his right leg. He was stuck in the nest because the other baling twine was sort of down deep in some duff and things like that. So he was kind of moving around like a basketball player with one foot stuck tied there and the other one just kind of moving around. Look at the middle photograph. I mean, I've got a million gruesome photographs, but I'm just showing you a couple. Here's a bird from the previous year, and here's the female up here incubated. All right. And here's another bird I was able to rescue during banding. You can just see this wad of baling twine around. So this is what a really bad nest looks like. So here's a nestling osprey. All right. At banding time, I'm on up to band, and you can see all the different color of baling twine here in the nest. And if you look closely, there are 2 eggs right here. These are osprey eggs. This female, I disliked this female because she brought in so much baling twine. I was actually happy summer that she didn't come back. Right, she had died sometime during the winter, and I was sort of relieved because she used to bring in so much baling twine. I would untangle her nestlings at banding time, and then before they fledged, she brought more baling twine in, and they would get hung up again. All right. But unbelievably, this bird was not entangled. Somehow it was shuffling around, but that female lost track of 2 of her eggs during incubation because she just brought in so much baling twine. I think she couldn't keep her eggs together and ended up losing track of them and only ended up hatching one. All right. On average, wrote a paper about this. On average, about a little bit less than half the nests typically have baling twine every year, and every year I untangle 3 to 4 nestlings, 3 to 4% of the nestlings. This is what it. And so you're probably wondering, well, where are they getting all this twine, right? I mean, I think they pick a lot of it up on the road. If you look at this photograph right here, I took this photograph a few weeks ago. As I was driving along a county road, I kept seeing bundles of baling twine on the side in the shoulder. And I already knew how this was happening. What happens is that a lot of ranchers are really good. They'll coil it, they'll cut the baling twine, coil it up. But what some of them do then is they throw it in the back of their flatbed pickup. That's where kind of the mental disconnect occurs. And that's fine. It will stay in the back of that flatbed pickup when they're driving 5 miles an hour through their paddock, all right? But as soon as they get on the county road and can go 70 miles an hour, well, guess what? It blows out, all right? And just in case you don't believe me, these ospreys will pick up bundles that look like this, all right? So they pick a lot of it up. just on the side of the road or in pastures. So what do we do about that? Well, education, right? Tell people about it. Keep track of your baling twine, put it in a box, that kind of thing. So Yellowstone Valley Audubon, back to the volunteers again now. We have tables at agricultural expos, sort of, telling farmers and ranchers about baling twine. Hey, this stuff's bad. I've written some articles for this Trader's Dispatch, which is a ranching magazine, kind of in the northern plains part of the country. I think it's Wyoming, Idaho, North and South Dakota, and Montana. It's a free magazine that ranchers get. And so I've had a couple articles in there just basically talking about the risks. And it's not just ospreys. Deer get hung up in baling twine, antelope get hung up in baling twine, all kinds of different things. We've had working for Northwestern Energy. You get your monthly power bill. Well, we have a little insert in there. It's got recipes and little stories about the company. Well, every year I also put it. We also put in, hey, just a call to a reminder to people. Hey, secure your baling twine. Don't have it blow out on the road where ospreys can get it. So we've made sort of an attempt really to get the information out there. Last year, 2 years ago, I wrote that scientific paper about baling twine, and the Wildlife Society picked it up and kind of promoted that. So that was great. So that was also a little bit more information out to the general public, if you will, or the scientific public. So we've had electrocutions, we've had baling twine entanglements and net wrap entanglements, and believe it or not, some ospreys were shot. And this is kind of an interesting story. Again, a little bit distressing. This is the Miles City Fish Hatchery. All right, so this is a state-operated fish hatchery in Miles City, which is the easternmost extent of our study area, if you remember. All right. Well, they breed largemouth bass, which are an exotic species. They're not native to Montana. They breed largemouth bass in these two big ponds right here. And ospreys are perfectly happy to hit a fish hatchery and take, so are pelicans, so are cormorants, so are, whatever. So any fish-eating bird has clear water with a lot of prey in it, it's going to go there. And ospreys were taking so many largemouth bass that Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, which is the state agency, applied for a depredation permit from the Fish and Wildlife Service, the federal regulator that regulates ospreys and all other birds. And they got themselves a depredation permit, and then they started to shoot ospreys to reduce that take of largemouth bass. All right. I knew these guys, but I didn't find out about it until they shot two of my banded ospreys, because then they had to report them. All right. So once they shot them as part of their permit requirements, they had to report, oh, these birds were banded. Then I found out about it. You can imagine Yellowstone Valley Audubon didn't take too kindly to it, and they are pursuing the issue formally. I'll just leave it at that. I wrote a paper about it, a scientific paper about it, and since that shooting, because we had data of productivity and the number of osprey nests occupied at Miles City before the shooting started, when the shooting was ongoing, and after the shooting. All right, so the shooting started in 2018. Look what happened to the number of young fledged once the shooting started and the number of occupied territories. They both went to zero. So if you compile all of the mortality data that are human caused, all right, and you graph it this way, most of the mortality is actually from twine, from baling twine. But if you look carefully, I should have made this a slightly different color. There's a line right here. About half of the birds that are entangled in baling twine, I get to early enough that I can rescue. All right, it's because we have nest monitors out there. They see, they suspect, God, that nestling's always been in the same spot. Its two siblings are moving around on the nest, but that one's always kind of in the same spot. Marco, I think maybe it's entangled. Or when I go up to band, I'll discover birds that are entangled and I can get them free. Sometimes I discover birds too late. They're entangled and they're dead by the time I get up there. Or like that one I showed you had to be euthanized. So, we save about half of them. But if we didn't save about half of them, they'd be dead. They don't recover from that. They can't get out of that baling twine, all right? So baling twine has the potential to be the highest sort of human-caused mortality source on our study area. Then it's followed by electrocution. Again, kind of a bummer, but we've kept that level sort of, that mortality level over the years. And then I've just, the birds that were shot. And it wasn't just the ones at the Miles City Fish Hatchery. We've had other people shoot ospreys, believe it or not. Again, I alluded to this earlier, hit by vehicles on the interstate, because the interstate kind of runs along the Yellowstone River, and we've got osprey nest platforms that are near the interstate. These birds cross sometimes over the interstate carrying a very large fish and get caught and get hit. Believe it or not, we've had a couple hit by planes at a small airport, a small private airstrip. You can see the nest platform right here. We had that nest platform moved, of course, because a couple of those birds got hit by planes. Unbelievably, the planes didn't crash because these are small planes. And so, other ones have flown into lines, broken their wings, haven't been able to get rehabilitated. We've had one of them get burned up in a refinery flare stack. So if you're familiar with refineries, they've got, there'll be a tall smokestack and sometimes you'll see fire coming out of it. That's called the flare stack. We've had one get burned up there. Okay, how about some joy again? All right. We've gone through the bummer stuff. Let's get back to some of the fun stuff. So where do these birds go? Right? I've been banding, almost up to 1,000, over 900 birds, nestlings are banded. All right. These are bands, again, that I told you that you can see with a spotting scope or with binoculars. And before doing this, I didn't realize how many photographers are out there that have really good cameras that are taking pictures of birds. And more than one, I would probably say half of the banded ospreys that people have seen that have been photographers, they didn't notice the bird was banded until they went home and were on their computer looking at their images, and they're like, "Oh, that thing's got a band on it," and their photographs are good enough that they can actually read the code. And so these light green dots are the movements of birds off of the study area. And you see, most of them sort of winter along the Gulf Coast, all right, from Florida all the way down to Yucatan. We've had some, though, end up all the way over in Puerto Rico. Unbelievably, I never would have predicted that. And as far south as Costa Rica, all right, there's a little bit of a dead zone here. These countries probably are not going to report ospreys that are banned just because there isn't a culture sort of conservation in those areas. But I'm sure ospreys from Montana are wintering in, El Salvador and Honduras and things like that. You just don't have people seeing them or reporting them. It's been kind of neat because these sightings, I get them through the bird banding lab, so I know who has seen the bird and where they've seen it. So I'll send them an email and say, "Hey, did you take any photographs?" Because then I'll be able to tell if it's a male or female. I'll give them more information about our project. So there's often a really kind of a fun dialogue because they're always excited to learn more details about the birds. And so we've actually had 3 articles from other birding organizations in the newspaper, write about our papers, our birds, right? So this bird that was found in Indiana Audubon, the person that saw it, photographed it, thought it was fairly unique, right? I mean, here's the only one we've got over in this area. And so he wrote an article about it that ended up in their quarterly magazine. So it's been really fun that way. It's been kind of rewarding. Here's a shameless plug now. I'm sure that some of you go down to Florida or the Texas Gulf Coast or Mexico during the wintertime. And I'm sure because you're birders, you take your binoculars. And maybe some of you have good cameras and things like that. I am encouraging you to go look at ospreys when you do that. All right. And you would think that there's no way in hell I'm going to find one of Marco's banded ospreys. Well, I did. All right. I went down to South Padre Island last year over Christmas. I took my spotting scope and my binoculars, and I thought, I'm just going to drive around and look at every osprey that I see. The first day I was down there, I found this clown eating a fish right next to some palm trees, and he's banded. I had banded him in Montana. All right. And this is a Google Street View. This is the pole that he was on. This is no brainer. This is this is brute force. Just driving around, and if I saw an osprey, I'd stop and look at it. So if you go on vacation down in those areas, I encourage you to look for the birds. And then I had a local birder down there tell me, and I didn't know this because I hadn't spent any time in areas where osprey winter. I'm a breeding season person. I didn't go down to the Gulf Coast, but I had a local birder down there tell me, you got to go around, drive around, half hour, 45 minutes before sunset. He said the birds will start coming back from where they've been foraging and they will roost right in town. And I was like, even though I knew ospreys are really tolerant of people, I was sort of suspect. I was like, yeah, right. Well, I did. Here's an osprey. This bird roosted here on this communications cable line outside this house. All right. I've got 4 or 5 photographs like that. I would drive around quickly, kind of, before the sun went down, before it was too dark for me to see. But I was able to, and then I'd go out really early in the morning before they all went out to their foraging area. And so you can do it. I am encouraging you to do it. So back to this slide, right? Well, as it turns out, I hope I've made the case that these are not strange bedfellows, right? I mean, it takes a little bit of thinking. Again, like I mentioned, they have different motivations, maybe different attitudes, different values, but they overlap when it comes to bird protection. All right, so there might be, like, again, I know the projects you started, but at some point in time, or maybe just learning about this, there are places to find common ground, even though you would think there's no way. We're dealing with industry, right? Industry is the bad guy or whatever. Oftentimes there is. You just need to think about it and find the right people. And for this project, it's been super rewarding. It's been, the power companies have benefited from having 40 volunteers out there looking and telling them that, hey, there's, sticks ending up on energized poles, right? That's reduced the amount of equipment damage, the number of outages. And at the same time, we, Yellowstone Valley Audubon, have been able to use power company bucket trucks to ban nestlings, to rescue nestlings that are in baling twine. So there is a true partnership here. It's not make-believe. It actually works. And so I'm just using that as an example, and why I like kind of going around and talking about this. These are the people that make it all happen, right? It's just me. It's the 40 volunteers that are out there. And over the years, I just asked our nest monitor coordinator, Deb Riegel. She coordinates all of the nest monitors. I kind of just coordinate the research part. But she tallied it up. We've had over 100. We've had 110 volunteers over the 17 years that this project has been going on. I mean, we're all 17 years older now. We need to find some younger people, right? But it's been a huge effort. All right, both from power companies, in-kind support, the number of volunteers are out there who supported us financially, landowners that have granted access, both private landowners and industrial landowners and cities and things like that. So it's been a huge effort. So I will just leave you with this osprey banded on the safely perched on a conduit pole, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Don't be shy. Yeah.
You do any monitoring, electronic monitoring, cigarette packs or
No.
this?
No, so we haven't done any GPS tracking or traditional radio tracking. As it turns out, there's one paper that went out that came out that showed that backpack transmitters on fledgling ospreys tend to lower survivorship. And they're also expensive, and it was just something I wasn't personally that interested in. I knew, I didn't need to know exactly what the migratory route was. And from banding, we've gotten great data on birds coming back, where they're settling to breed. And so banding itself with these color bands has provided the information that I, as a scientist, have been interested in.
In San Francisco, north end of the Golden Gate Bridge, on the Hawk Hill there, they've got Golden Gate raptors.
Yep.
And they monitor 20 different
Yep.
with bigger birds.
Yep.
Monitor.
Yep. No, it's very common. It's just something that we haven't done.
That I heard about but in banded, pack was put on, it flew south all the way to the Mexican border, went east, turned around and went on the east side of the Rocky Mountains all the way up to Colorado. I mean, up to Washington, I think it was. Went west and then back down.
Yeah, I mean, they do crazy things. I never would have predicted some of our birds would settle to breed in Utah and Colorado. I never would have thought that. So, yeah.
What were some of your top mortality that were related?
Yeah. So mortality, I should have repeated the question. Sorry, because I'm not sure people can hear it. Mortality factors that are natural, non-human caused. We've had a few, they're usually harder to determine, but we've had some starvation that we know about where birds have been emaciated, and this has been mostly on the wintering area. We've had eagles kill ospreys. And I actually watched a golden eagle kill an osprey one day. We've had someone film, this is on our study area, someone filmed bald eagles killing a female osprey. So those are the two biggest sort of a food problem, typically for younger birds, obviously. But then eagles are I'm not going to say they're a big problem, but bald eagle populations are increasing the same way that osprey populations are increasing. And we've got data, not great data, more anecdotal right now, where we've had osprey, an osprey platform be occupied for 4 or 5 years, have good productivity, and then all of a sudden, bald eagles show up in the neighborhood and build a nest in a cottonwood that's, a couple 100 meters away from the osprey platform. And next thing you know, the ospreys aren't breeding there anymore. So there is an interaction. Eagles will suppress osprey breeding in certain places, and golden and like I said, we had balds kill adults, and we've had goldens kill fledglings.
Where did the funding come
So the funding, it's a lot of it has just been small grants. So one of them from a private organization, a trustee in Wyoming. We've had people donate money. We've gotten some from Toyota. We've gotten some from, like when I was still at the university, got $10,000 from the university. Now a lot of it's in kind. I work for Northwestern Energy now, so this is a project that I'm able to use some time on. But it's been fairly low cost, right? We have literally 40 volunteers, and they donate all their time and all their mileage, their gasoline costs. And the only real cost we have would be bands, to tell you the truth. And I've bought all my number of bands I'm going to buy, and that's pretty much it. So, yes.
So last year, right there in Wells, at Wells Harbor, we watched an osprey couple build a nest on hole number 5 in the middle of.
I was just there today. We were just there, and there's a nest there, and there are 2 gulls on it right now, but not eggs or anything.
Watched the ospreys build that nest, and he got amazing pictures of it. Them bringing in the sticks and just, we'd sit there for hours watching them building stick by stick by stick. And then they abandoned it, and we don't know why.
Do you remember?
That's the harbor nest. Know about it.
Do you remember when that was? What month it was when they quit?
Late April, early May.
Oh, late April, early May, huh?
Yeah, and then they were there for about 3 weeks, 3.5 weeks, and then we never saw them again. Like,
But the nest is still there.
yes,
Yeah, no, I literally saw the nest today.
My question was, you may have answered it. What would cause the mutant?
There are probably teenagers, and teenagers sometimes just don't have their act together, right? I mean, seriously, they may have been a new pair that, they're trying it. Maybe they'll show up again this year. I don't know. Were there boats? I mean, is there boat disturbance? Right. But did you ever see boats go by, and how did the birds react to that?
they didn't seem to be bothered.
Yeah.
A lot of bald eagles left here. Even though in wintertime we see them, over Drake Island or, even South Sanford, we see eagles in the trees, and a lot more this year than I think we've ever seen. Populations that seem to be growing.
But you never saw interactions between eagles and osprey. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Pictures of attack.
Yeah. I mean, I sound like I'm putting eagles down. I did my PhD on eagles. I love eagles, right? But yeah, there's a tense relationship between eagles and ospreys, and that may have been it. There may have just been enough disturbance because that pylon is, can't get more exposed than that, right? I mean, there's no cover there or anything. I'd be interested to see if they try again, or where they went last year after they gave up on it. Talk to your local power company and see if they showed up somewhere. I've seen one platform. I haven't driven around looking for them, but I did see, like I said, I saw one platform kind of up from the interstate, kind of just right around Kittery. I could see it.
So for about the past month, I've been observing the eagles and osprey, and they want to the same dead tree, and that they'll fight or dive on each other.
Is there a nest on it already? Is there a nest on it already? No.
There's never been a nest. It comes to a point, it's not cut off.
Gotcha.
But there are also this morning that 2 crows were dive bombing the osprey, and he left, and then eventually around and came back to roost.
We've had eagles take over osprey nests. So we've had, on cell towers and in trees, from what I remember, where, ospreys built a nest, use it for 1 or 2 years, and then eagles show up and they're like, guess what, we're taking this now. And we've had that happen. That's why I asked if there already was a nest there. Yeah, right. They move.
In addition to the nest is, I'm assuming that the eagle's nest is bigger than.
They get bigger, yeah. Yep.
And that's off of, on 95 north. Just after the bridge, there's someone put a pole up with a nest on it, and a bird is there today.
Does that platform have a perch on it?
There's two,
Are there two? Okay,
and they both have the purchase.
Gotcha.
They just added those this year.
So
yeah,
it's a little further up, it used to be on top of the power, and somebody
yep,
in this winter moved it off
yep.
the pole. And then there's another one on, they exit 3 on northbound in New Hampshire. So there's a pole off to the side of the exit.
Yeah,
You can't see it from the freeway, but you can off the exit.
so working for a power company now, we have a group called the Avian Power Line Interaction Committee where biologists that work for different power companies all across the country get together. And we did a poll, and ospreys were the #1 problem species for power companies across the country. And it's, that's why I show that slide first, that breeding bird survey data. One more question, or? Yeah.
So notwithstanding all the mortality and just kind of sitting that 100 birds make it through the first year out of Yellowstone River, how many of those birds do?
In the literature, the figure from Michigan from a long-term study was 11%, 10%, something like that. We seem to be a little bit higher than that. We're still early, right? I mean, but that's a pretty good figure, 10%. Yes. Oh, sorry.
In your acknowledgement, you noted a couple of other power companies there. Are those just local ones there?
Yeah, so along our study area, there are 5 different power companies. And so Northwestern Energy is one of them. Then there were 3 cooperatives, and then in Montana Dakota Utilities.
Power companies.
Yeah, so well, I know one in Montana. So in the western part of the state, University of Montana works with Northwestern Energy and a couple of the other cooperatives on a different river, but they also have sort of the same arrangement when it comes to accessing nests with bucket trucks. So yeah, but I'm trying to, other parts of the country, I don't know. I wouldn't doubt it, I just don't. Yeah.
But if you're not managing the primary.
Yeah, and that is a power company cost, right? They do that. So, and they they do it to get the birds off. That's a regulatory thing, right? Power company can be fined, prosecuted for killing birds. And so with ospreys, fortunately, we have a really good management tool. We can put up a platform, and the birds will take to it. Literally, we've put up platforms, put a few sticks on it, and before we even 100, 200 feet away, the birds are on it from an energized pole. I mean, it is amazing. I mean, they're that sort of geared towards reproducing, and they're that tolerant of, oh yeah, I'll take this thing. And if you're curious what that cost is for something like that, I always tell people, because I have a lot of people wanting us to put platforms up just in their backyard, and I'm like, no, we're not doing that unless there's a problem. It's a couple $1,000s. I mean, the equipment isn't much, but a line crew, you've got 4 people doing it, have to be there for that. But yeah, so Northwestern Energy alone, we have 200 to 300 platforms up in Montana. So that's a fairly big, that's just us. Plus all the other power companies.
Interesting recycling of the wire reels.
Oh yeah, yes, they're perfect. So, yes.
I just like the ways the gardens mentioned what's happening in the state. When I was sailing, we kept the boat down east. The ospreys on buoys and poles so we can out in the field.
In the marsh and stuff.
The marshes and the areas where sailboats were moored. Never saw ospreys, but I just wondered if anybody knows not just effort by Nate Arbonne and bridge ospreys.
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised. But you go down in the wintering area, the ospreys are perched on masts, sailboat masts everywhere. I mean, it's crazy. So, all right. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much.